decide that the government should discontinue funding of human embryonic stem cell research. I'm just going to start out by refuting a few of my opponent's points. She said that embryonic stem cells can help treat a range of diseases, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. Now, I'd like to give you from stemcellresearch.org, I'd like to give you a brief list of diseases that have already been treated successfully with adult stem cells: Parkinson's, leukemia, cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, heart damage. And basically, she made the claim that adult stem cells are less effective and that they cannot treat the same things that embryonic stem cell research can treat. Unfortunately, that is not true, and adult stem cells have been being used for decades, treating the same things that they claim that embryonic stem cells will be able to treat. She also mentioned that there are alternatives to getting the embryonic stem cells that don't kill life. I would just like to pose the question, what are these alternatives? Because to get the embryonic stem cells, you allow an embryo to mature anywhere from 5 to 8 days, and then you destroy it to get the embryonic stem cells out of the blastocyst. And while it might be easier to call it excising tissues from blastocysts than killing a human, unfortunately, it's the same thing. My opponent also mentioned that at the stage that they are getting the embryonic stem cells from these embryos, they are not human. I'd like to ask, if they're not human, then what are they? If you consider the embryo to be human when you hear its heartbeat at 10 days, if it's human at 10 days and it's human at 10 weeks, then it's human from the start. It doesn't start out as one thing and then become human. As a matter of fact, at the April 1981 hearings in Congress, the Human Life Bill, number S-158, was passed. And this bill is basically Congress saying that we believe that life begins at conception. So if Congress itself said that life begins at conception, then Congress allowing funding for embryonic stem cell research, which kills a 5-day-old embryo, is basically the government funding the destruction of life, because they have already defined this embryo as being alive. My opponent also said that the induced pluripotent stem cells are ineffective. This is not true. These cells, you can get them from adult skin cells, and from there, they basically reduce these cells all the way back to the embryonic state. And while they are somewhat difficult to control, just like the embryonic stem cells, these have been successfully used to be manipulated the same exact way as embryonic stem cells are. And instead of coming from embryos, they come from adult skin cells, which also means that they have the same DNA as the person that they are coming from, so there will be no risk of the body rejecting the stem cells. Here you go. Sorry. There was a report from Israel last year in February 2009 where they were doing research with embryonic stem cells, and they injected some embryonic stem cells into a boy with a fatal neuromuscular disease. Within 4 years, he had developed headaches, and when they did scans of his brain, they found him to have multiple tumors in his brain and spinal cord. And actually, these tumors, when they tested them, contained the same genetic material as the female embryos that were used to obtain the stem cells for his therapy, clearly showing that it was these embryonic stem cells that they had used that had caused his cancer. And if they're supposed to be treating cancer and they're causing cancer. So our main claims are that the government should not be funding the destruction of life. Like I said before, the government passed a bill that said life begins at conception, and so they shouldn't be using the taxpayer dollars to be killing this life. Also, the government is highly inefficient at allocating its money. We all know that. Unfortunately, the combination of the combination of the high research and treatment costs and government inefficiency would limit the effectiveness of any government funds that we could give to embryonic stem cell research. Basically, in California, they passed a law saying that they were going to give $3 million to embryonic stem cell research. That was in 2007, and none of the researchers have seen a dime of that money yet, because most of it was spent going into the bureaucracies to set up all the programs that regulate the stem cell research. Like my partner had said, the NIH has designated money for these. Again, the researchers haven't seen any of it. So it is so expensive just for the government to give them the money that it limits the effectiveness. Also, the treatment costs would be very, very high. Anyways, the treatment costs would be so high that it would put a strain on Medicaid and Medi-Cal funding, which is government-funded health care. And so then the government would put in the money to find these cures, and when and if the cures do come around, the government would then have to pay for the people to have the cures. And people who have private insurance, this would give the private insurance companies incentive to raise their coverage plans, so it would cost more people money. And there's also a high risk of private plans refusing to cover individuals who might possibly want the therapy. So when you're going to try and get health care, they say, well, you are available to get this research and we're not going to cover you. So that is why we believe that the government should discontinue funding of embryonic stem cell research.